Which vehicle was the winner of the 4x4 Australia 4x4 of the Year? I'm James Earling, and you're listening to the 4x4 Earth podcast. Today, our special guest, Jason Locke, one of the judges for the 4x4 Australia 4x4 of the Year. And in our last episode, he gave us a really good insight into the way that the judging for the awards was conducted. He gave us an overview of all of the vehicles. This week, we're going to look at what was the winner and why, and some of the other questions around it, like what other vehicles would we have liked to have seen, what vehicles would do really well. Because remember, all of these vehicles are stock, so they're straight out of the dealer's showroom. Which vehicles could have been really epic with maybe a different set of tyres, maybe a little bit of lift. Also, what vehicles is it going to be exciting to see next year? Because there are a couple of really exciting vehicles that are coming out this year. Quick public service announcement. If you're liking the 4x4 Earth podcast and you see it come up on your social media, please like and share it. Lastly, what topics is it that you would like to hear on the 4x4 Earth podcast? Well, we want to get a few more guests in on the podcast this year, so I'm very keen to do that. If you've got some ideas, please let me know. Either hit me up on our Facebook page, or you can go to 4x4earth.com, sign up as a member, and join the conversation there. Every month we get over 200,000 visits to the website. Lots of really good discussions going on in there. Some fairly dangerous driving that we've seen recently, which has been a little bit scary to see. But always some interesting things being discussed on the 4x4 Earth forum. So let's get back into our interview with Jason Locke.
Join James from 4x4earth.com as he learns all there is to know about four-wheel driving, camping, fishing, and getting out and exploring our great country on the 4x4 Earth podcast.
So, testing for the final six out at LD Station.
Ended up at LD Station after doing the bush loops there. So there's some really good tracks there, and I guess I'd seen a lot of photos over the years. I'd never been out there before. I'd driven past it many a time, but I hadn't actually been in there. And each Easter they have a big event up there, and I see lots of the magazines have been going there testing, and I see why now, because there's actually some really good climbs. The views are spectacular, where the sunset are, and for being able to photo and video, and as well as the testers of being able to have the same cars, be able to drive up a track, turn around at the top, come back down, swap into different cars, up and down hills, testing the traction control, also the hill descent modes and all the modes the car have. Fantastic wide variety of conditions on the one property, and a great camp back there, a bit of a bush camp there as well with a camp kitchen and showers, and being able to do that and wash that out was actually really good. The other thing about LD Station, with a camp kitchen, some camping area, it's a good place to go and be able to get out of the 45 odd degree heat at the end of the day, be able to get back into the swag as well. That was just nice to be there, but again, well worth a look, and the four-wheel driving on there is spectacular as well.
Beautiful. So how did each of those vehicles go then?
All those vehicles did well, and we'd narrowed it down from 18 to 6, and going through them, I guess vehicle by vehicle is the easiest way to do it here. The Hilux were just dependable. Good old Toyota reliability, just constant, did everything very well. Great vehicle, and the improvements in that Hilux since it first came out. I think it's in its third update in that model. But they really noticed it was the traction control has been recalibrated in there. It actually works a lot better than the previous model, so it actually put its power down, got through there very well. A nice cabin, everything else in there as well. It worked pretty well. And it came a very close second to the Ranger, I believe, in the voting. The Ranger XLT, again, most of us had a Ranger at some stage over the last, since 2011 or 2012 when they come out there. The 2-litre bi-turbo motor, while it was good, does feel down on power on the 3.2. Dean Mellor actually has a XLT Ranger himself, and he actually opted for the 3.2 litre motor, so it just has that torque, the longer stroke. I believe it's a better four-wheel driving motor. A lot of other people will claim that. Robert Pepper has been on here, likes this one, I believe, for its efficiency out of 2 litres. And when it's on paper, it stacks up as more power and more torque. It just didn't feel like just as much. But the Ranger, again, a fantastic platform that's been around 10 years now. and we're all very excited to see this new model when it comes out, which will actually, should improve on this one a fair bit, but it was still the standout. It was the best in that ute class. The Prado and the Nissan Patrol in under 100,000, both very different ways of doing it, very similar in costs. Big V8 petrol as opposed to a 4-cylinder diesel in the Prado, but both vehicles did really well. The traction control, again, calibrations, the Toyotas have improved so much in their off-road ability and their traction control, and even on their dirt road handling, I believe. So both were very good vehicles. All of us would be happy to own either of them. They did really well. But in the under 100,000, I think the Patrol is still the judge's favourite out of those two. And in the Defender and the Land Cruiser, where the Land Cruiser trumped it, I guess, bush ability, everything else there, traditionalist. I was very impressed with the Defender. Its traction control, its tyres, its built-in tow points, it scored lots of points. But that Cruiser, that V6 motor is an absolute ripper. It's a gem. Like I said, we've drag raced them in the dirt against the 200 series. It just, more power, and the fuel usage was probably about 20% down on what we'd seen in a 200 series in the same conditions. So good news. Cost of diesel, everything's going up. More fuel efficiency. Seeing the car being lighter in lots of spots, and the curb weight of the car coming down, even though it's got a lot more features in there. Might be a bit harder to put some aftermarket accessories in there, but again, we weren't judging on that, but it actually came up there too. And the Defender, you can't buy a bull bar for the Defender, you can for the Land Cruiser. Defender numbers, we're seeing a lot more of them delivered, but they've had a lot of supply chain issues. We haven't seen many of the vehicles out there. I'm seeing a lot more of them on the road now. But two very different vehicles, four-wheel independent suspension compared to just independent in the front of the Cruiser, and airbags all around in the Defender. But the Defender's is a lot smaller in the vehicle than the Land Cruiser as well. So again, Land Cruiser did it out there, but two very worthy cars have been there in all of that as well. So, and both of those cars were carrying fridges and eskies and the room in the back of them. So we lived out of them, worked them pretty well. So Land Cruiser trumped it, and the Ranger were the two winners in this competition. And I think any of the six, they were all worthy finalists, and the cream of the crop. I think we did it well. It was democratic. There was nothing standout, arguments between all the cars or anything else like that. We all concurred on those, and it was actually really good at the end of the day to sit down with a beer and talk about it, and talk about the vehicles and how they all did, and go back through our notes and going through that as well. So it was a fantastic opportunity to get out there, drive the latest vehicles in standard trim, and see how they stood up to the Australian bush.
So when you think about the vehicles, and like a little bit of modification could have made a big difference. So particularly if you're thinking about tyres, because that's not a huge, that's probably the first thing that a lot of people do, particularly if they come with road tyres. Yeah. What would you have liked to have tested that didn't make the final six because of those simple modifications? What do you reckon you would have liked to have seen?
Oh, I think the Amarok would have been really good out there as well on a decent all-terrain tyre with some sidewall height in it there too. So again, as we know, lowering tyre pressures, the first thing we should learn when we're doing that, being able to run with reduced pressure, less impact on the ground, being able to do them, would have seen that as well. I would have loved to have seen the Land Cruiser and the Patrol on all-terrain tyres as well. The Defender was the only car there really that had an all-terrain tyre on at the end. But unfortunately, it was one of the ones I had to change a tyre on as well. So we still managed to damage a tyre on the Defender when it probably had the most suitable tyres out there, out of those the top six vehicles on the end.
Wow. And
any of the vehicles, we always know a tyre that's actually tuned and available in the bush as well. So you remember, we didn't have spare tyres, and hard to go into Broken Hill and get a 21-inch exotic tyre, and then having to risk driving home as well without a spare tyre. So it wasn't supported. There wasn't a Hercules behind us with all spares and everything else like that too. And I've been lucky if I'm doing a one-make working for a manufacturer and you've got spare tyres and you carry lots of things there as well. And as most people do, and have more tyre repair equipment where we had compressors, basic tyre repair. Also, we had recovery gear there as well. We had the basics to get out of there as well, but not a whole thing there too. But any of the vehicles would have been much better on a set of tyres. But again, that suspension tune in the Walkinshaw Amarok, they've done a really good job on it. And next level with a set of tyres on it, I think it would have been right up there. And again, an old platform that's about to be replaced. So looking forward to seeing what these new vehicles are coming out in the next year or two.
Are there any models that you would have liked to have seen out there?
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen the Silverado and the Trail Boss out there as well. Very excited for the new Ranger Raptor that's coming out towards the end of this year, I believe. Twin diff locks, all-terrain tyres, increased suspension, and almost 300 kilowatts of V6 petrol motor. It's going to be a game changer, I believe, out there as well. And also the Ineos is coming as well. So seeing a vehicle that's been designed from the ground up with the best components, and it's basically been built along these criteria that we're judging on to be an outback vehicle, be ready to go touring, and have the options ready to go. I think it's going to stack up there when it's out there in these tests in the real world.
And so hopefully that should be ready for next year's testing.
Yeah. We've seen prototypes. There's prototypes at the Grand Prix in Melbourne the other week, and we've seen a really good program from them coming out in the bush. People doing drives. There's lots of people with deposits on them. Talk they're coming around towards the end of the year or early next year. I'm really looking forward to going out there in a vehicle that's been thought about to do this as well, and getting out there as well. I can see one being in my garage or your garage. If it's up to the hype that we've been reading about.
I don't mind the look of it, and by all accounts, I haven't heard any. There hasn't been too much bad press about it.
Not at all.
But it'll be interesting to see, what it's like when it gets out into how hard it is to get. The Ranger Raptor is going to be hard to get, I think.
Yeah, there'll be a waiting list for that too. And there's the tradies haven't had an SS Commodore or a Falcon Ute to buy for a while, and the current Raptor, like I said, it's a very good vehicle and it's off-road tuning and everything else in there. And this is the next level when you look at it. A car with front and rear diff locks, Fox off-road suspension in there, and watching it, I can't wait to get behind the wheel of one of those.
How do you think the vehicles that were looked at now, how would they compare to sort of like 10 or 15 years ago? And where do you think we're going to be in 10 or 15 years from now?
It's amazing. And I guess the hardest thing for a lot of people to get their head around is the electronic assistance in the traction control, hill descent, which just weren't in vehicles 15 years ago. So you had to do everything manually, and driver ability and doing that too. So even going through the judges, getting the vehicles into sand mode, and there was some the patrol wouldn't get up one of the hills in some of the modes. So again, it was good for us to, between all of us, to discuss how to get up the hill, what you need to do to the vehicle, and change it, the way you drove it. But I'm just thinking how quiet these vehicles were, how capable they were. Vehicles you wouldn't dream taking across the desert 15 years ago. These vehicles did it very well as standard, so they all covered a lot of distance. Their fuel economy was pretty good. When you're looking at across all of them, they a lot more efficient than they had. But again, they didn't have big roof racks and bull bars and as much weight as you'd normally take. Standard tyres, so they had everything going for them in that way. But yeah, they've improved out of sight, I believe, in their off-road ability and the traction control and the way the cars just put their power down and got through with it. Those electronic aids, they did very well. Made a bit more of a point of shoot. A lot of people, were talking about the lack of the driver ability, and you didn't have to put as much effort into it to make the vehicles get up the hill. They still work, and you had to use the technique and put the car in the right modes. But they did work, and so it was a lot different. And now you wouldn't dream of, we're talking about that, driving a Hilux. Number one, they wouldn't make the average highway speed going there. 2.4 litre diesel Hilux from the mid-80s, you'd be 20 kilometres an hour slower, a lot rougher, and just wouldn't do the speed and the ease to get across there as well. Well, very capable vehicles, but not as good all-rounder as these vehicles. And I think, and to answer in the future, looking into the crystal ball, I think there's still going to be diesel vehicles out there doing these long distances and the remote areas until they get hydrogen. And very interesting listening to your podcast about hydrogen and electric, talking about there. I think these are still going to be the vehicles that are going to be covering, very similar vehicles to these. There will be more driver assistance. There might be electric motors. Even the turbocharged petrol Land Rover Discovery had a mild supercharger, so it was a mild hybrid. So when you're just idling around or on a bush track, a lot of it was using its electric power driving through the supercharger. And so the fuel consumption was a lot lower in that vehicle. seeing some things there too. So that's, I think, what we're going to see is a lot of mild hybrids as assistance on these as well. So there'll be some regenerative power used up there, just making them more efficient and using less fuel.
I think it's going to be interesting to see where we're at with four-wheel drives because of the fact that range is critical.
Definitely.
And we're not likely, it's going to be a while before we get a EV charging station out of LD Station, I reckon.
Yeah, maybe. It depends what they're going to drive. It's a commuter car. But you didn't see too many electric cars in Broken Hill, even back into, in 40 k's down the road to where it was there as well. There's talking about that, but till the infrastructure gets out there and does that as well, it's going to be a while. And I don't know if electric's going to have it, and I'd love to, and seeing electric conversions into vehicles. I've got friends that have converted, 1970 Land Rover to an electric-powered vehicle, and that's doing well. It wouldn't do the range of these trips. And we've seen solar-powered vehicles out there, but they've had solar panels bigger than the car over a Suzuki doing it out there as well, and they just stop and wait for half the day to allow it to charge up as well. So I'm sure we'll see better technology and better ways of doing it. But even the V8 petrol Patrol, it was running on fumes sometimes when we got into fuel stops compared to the diesel vehicles and the diesels with the bigger tanks. Again, the aftermarket can fix some of that. There's long-range tanks, but then the spare wheel's got to be outside, so it's a $6,000 or $7,000 option by the time you put a spare wheel carrier and a bigger fuel tank in there to get the capacity up there. But it's what you got to do. But then it needs a suspension upgrade to carry that as well, and probably a GVM upgrade as well. So it keeps going on and on. But it's making the cars fit for purpose. So who knows? And we were talking about it before, James, before we started recording. Sometimes it's sensible to have a commuter car and then have your four-wheel drive that's set up, and you might have your four-wheel drive lasting longer. You might change over your economy running around car. Might make sense.
Yeah, I think that's one thing to think about. Now, you were talking about, was there much variation in the driving capability of the judges, or would it have been worthwhile taking an average for someone who doesn't four-wheel drive a lot? Given the fact that I think that there's probably a lot more people who four-wheel drive 5 times a year or twice a year than there is people of your capability. Who was was there a lot of difference between, you don't need to name who the least capable driver was, but was there a big difference between the best and the worst of the driver, or least experienced?
Some of the experiences as well. Everyone was well travelled, and they were actually picked and chosen for that as well. No, everyone was very good there as well, and good point. It'd be good to see that too. It was hard. It was long hours, long days, so everyone was chosen who've used to outback travel and doing these grueling miles. If you're doing 14 hours in a day plus judging and doing photos and everything else like that, it was a hard ask. I think people without the experience, they would have struggled with some of the time frames. But saying that, those vehicles there, I think everyone there was very good instructors and have been around long enough to be able to coach and guide and that people through there as well. So great idea. It'd be good to see that, and I think in some shorter stints and maybe in some of the controlled environments, it would have been a good thing to do and see how people react to the cars as well. And I guess we'll speak about the G-Wagon, how hard it was for some of the controls for people to figure out how to do. Yeah, it, needs some seat time in there as well, but that'd be a great thing to do. Sure, we'll pass that on into the 4x4 Australia team and see what we can do.
Well, it's one of those things that people talk about. I know when I went from my Patriot into the Maverick, that had a lot of lift, big tyres. I could go, it was an order of magnitude the kind of tracks that I could do.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be interesting to see how that, have we taken driving capability out of the equation now for four-wheel driving with all of the electronic aids?
Yeah, definitely. And I noticed that. So I was out with Robert Pepper. I bought a Holden Rodeo after company cars for years. So no traction control, no driver aids, no wheel travel, everything going against it. And it was just bound to pick a line and do it. And, Robert and I both commented, that we were surprised where the vehicle made it by picking lines and doing that as well. And I guess, as we spoke about, the ability of all these vehicles to be able to point and shoot them, and the car make the driver look good, I guess, is what we're trying to say here as well. and they do. They're very capable, but that's where the game has come to. And if you go back, we're all driving around in 40 series Land Cruisers or old World War II Jeeps. It took a lot more driver ability to be able to get to the top of the hill or across the dune or whatever there as well. And the assistance and, the crawl modes in these cars and the, you can push a button in the Land Rover or the Land Cruiser if it's stuck, and the car will basically drive itself out in most situations. And you imagine the calibre of the people there and the experience that the people have had around the world. We did try that, and they are pretty good.
Gold. Any final thoughts then?
Yeah. Again, we kept touching on it, with some help of the Australian aftermarket, which we've spoken about before on previous podcasts, which is the best in the world and makes the cars work really well. It's exciting to see the manufacturers actually tailoring their cars, but there's still room in the aftermarket to make them better and do them a lot better. I'd love to see some of the maybe the top modified vehicles going along on a test against these standard ones, and then be able to do that. But it's hard with private ownership and doing that, not being on the press fleet. It's hard to organise, but it's actually good to do that. It's always hard to hand over the keys when it's your hard-earned money into your vehicle and you're sold or pass it on to someone else too. But no, it would be good to see, and in these same kind of conditions do it. But very hard logistically to do. But might have to see what some of the listeners here have to say about that. Might be a poll. Would you like to see something done and tested and done?
Well, I actually think that would be a really good point when you compare, particularly if you've got the same driver and the same track, and the same vehicle, but with a different spec.
Yeah.
So a little bit of extra lift, better tyres. What is the differential that you see in that? Because, how much further up the track can you get, or what tracks will it be able to do? Because we don't really have, there's not a lot out there really, is there? We don't actually say, you can't get up here, or it's much more difficult to get up this track. You're much more likely to, and realistically, the solution that most people take to that problem is just put the boot down a little bit harder, isn't it?
It is.
And that makes it more dangerous?
It is, and it's harder on the environment, harder on the vehicles, everything else like that. We want to tread lightly and do that as well, and I got taught very early in my driving career, four-wheel off-road career, that the best four-wheel driver is not the most spectacular. You just want to see it, get up there with the minimum amount of fuss and not have to work it hard, and that's exactly what we did when we're looking at these vehicles off-road. So it would be really good to see. I know there was, I think, going back 10, 15 years, they had aftermarket of the same vehicles tested in one of the magazines, which was good to see them, and different diff locks, suspension, tyres, all that kind of thing. It's a hard thing, but trying to organise that. I've seen tyre tests like that too, where they'll do similar things and have all wheels and tyres set up there, and the comparison ones, but some good real world stuff, and just see what the modifications will do. Now, again, logistically very hard. Be really good to see though. Let's put our heads together and see what we can come up with.
Because I think that, something like a diff lock, how much of a difference does it make? We know what it does, but what track will it get you up that you won't get up without a diff lock?
Yeah.
Same. I mean, tyres are a pretty obvious one because for anyone who's driven on roadies, particularly when it gets muddy, then, I've driven on Teflon tyres that don't stick to anything. And that's pretty fun, exciting / scary, terrifying.
Oh, it is. Well, I've driven on the most aggressive off-road tyres in extreme conditions where it's turned into the same thing though as well, but you're a lot further into it as well.
Yeah.
And it comes back down to, again, your recovery gear and your experience, and the more capable you make the vehicles, it's the further they get stuck. And a lot of the people say, I'll put diff locks in first, or put that. I keep coming back to winch and recovery gear. How you get out of that too. It's part of my risk assessment when you do anything. What do you do when you get stuck? How are you going to get out of there? Not a pessimist, I'm a realist. You've got to get out there and get out of there as well. But very interesting discussion and good theory. And there's all kinds of things. And I've even seen people try and work out the perfect off-road vehicle, and they've had spreadsheets about approach angle, departure angle, ramp over, width, tracks, everything else, like what would make the best vehicle. It's again, your Holden Ford, your Collingwood Hawthorn, it's all that in personal preference, and we're not all the same. So what works for some people doesn't work for others, but it's just adapting to making what you've got to make it work. But the main thing, get out there and use it and enjoy it and see this great country.
That's exactly it, yes. Alrighty, thank you very much.
Anytime, James. Love talking to you.
Thank you, bye. So, there you have it. Everything you wanted to know about the 4x4 Australia 4x4 of the year, but were afraid to ask. Thank you very much, Jason, for your time and giving us that really thorough rundown. Got a much better idea about the process now, and it will be interesting to see what happens next year. Really super keen to see what the Ineos Grenadier is going to look like. That's about it. Safe travels. Hopefully I'll see you out on the track someday. Bye.
4x4earth.com is used by over 200,000 people every month to find great tracks, organise trips, and find out how to better enjoy exploring the great outdoors. There's over 1,000 tracks and 300 campsites ready for you to explore. So check out 4x4earth.com today and sign up to get access to the track information, ask questions, and meet other 4x4 Earthers. Membership is completely free.